just in case it wasn't obvious from the thumbnail and the title, this is not going to be a gun video. Um, it was about 5 days, less than 5 days from the time I decided that I wanted to get the Part 107 drone certification to today, which is the day that I took the test. And wanted to talk about that and kind of tell my story because I know that in the shooting sports world, there may be some of you that want to use a drone for practice, right? To be able to get different angles with your form and that sort of thing, and then also fellow gun tubers out there, and kind of what to expect if you at least go down the pathway that I did. So we need to start out, I think, by talking about the drone that caused it all. And for me, it's this one right here, the DJI Neo, which is a phenomenal, really cool little drone. This drone right here, far more advanced than the 2 or 3 drones I pretty much crashed within 24 hours, crashed and burned previously. This thing, you can't hardly tear it up. You can't hardly crash it. And what makes this kind of unique is you don't need a big elaborate controller for it, at least if you're not concerned with long range operation. And then you don't even particularly need your cell phone to control it. You can just hit some buttons on this thing and it will do some pre programmed flight maneuvers and film those, which is really cool. So I thought, man, this could be a really cool um, addition to the footage out there, on the range and stuff. And so um, I got this about a month ago, 3 weeks or a month ago. And you can see I've been playing around. I've got some different accessories. This is not stock configuration. And never did produce any content or make anything with it that I posted here on the channel, obviously. And um, so I was getting around, kind of getting ready to do that. And then I was like, I need to check into some of the regulations. And what I found out was that in order to use a drone for pretty much any type of commercial use, and that could be if your YouTube channel is monetized, I read things that said it could even apply if you were just posting to normal social media and that site or that page has got some type of advertising on it. So I'm like, okay, so let me look into it and see what all it takes to sort of get legit, right? And what I found out was it's sort of a hassle of a process, but I want to kind of give you the 30,000 foot view. This is not a tutorial, it's not a step by step. You may have to go back and watch this a few times. You may have to take some notes, that sort of thing. But essentially, you're going to get on and you're going to apply for um, a number to be able to take the Part 107 certification test, and that's what you need to pass in order to then turn around and submit an application and get the license. Right from there, once you're licensed, then any drone that you have, even this one, we'll talk about more about that here in a second, why it is. But even this one, you have to have it registered, and you have to have remote ID capability. And I know that may be going over a lot of people's heads, but this drone, um, recreationally, if you was just playing around with it for fun, is under 250 grams. So it doesn't have to be registered recreationally, but because it's commercial, um, I do. And because it does not have, it's just a small little thing and under 250 grams, it does not have remote ID capability built in. And that's sort of what um, emits a signal for it to relay GPS position and altitudes and things like that, right? But they do make external modules. So once you get the license, once you sign up, you take the test, you get the license, and you go to register. If you have a DJI Neo like this one right here, you got to register the drone and you got to register the module and then associate that module with the drone. So, um, but yeah, this is really cool. This will basically act as an automated tracking style tripod. I can put this into a tracking mode, send it up, and it'll essentially follow me around. It will take zooming elevated shots. It will take 360-degree shots. It will do a lot of cool things. By the way, link not only to this and the remote ID I'm talking about, the remote ID module, but also other things that we're going to talk about in this video. Link in pinned comments, right? So anyway, played around with this, obviously upgraded, did some things, decided, okay, I've got to need to get the license. Uh, Looked into the process for that, and I did that. Today is a Friday. I did that Sunday, so 5 days ago, late at night is when I looked into that. And so I started watching YouTube videos and watch some YouTube videos, click some of the links in the description for some of the supplemental articles and different things that they had in those YouTube videos, and ended up finding a practice test and links to all these practice tests. The two I'm going to talk about, the two main ones, because I can't remember the name of them off the top of my head. But links to those also in a pinned comment below. But I found one from like it was King's School, I think, or something like that. It was definitely King, but it was free. And not only was it free, but it definitely mimicked. Um, this is after the fact telling you this, but it definitely kind of mimicked the test. It was a 60-question test. You could actually adjust how many questions, but you could adjust it up for 60 questions. It gave you the 2 hour time limit. It had a huge pool of questions that it alternated through every time that you took this test. Um, and while it would tell you what you got wrong, it wouldn't really explain why. But kind of getting ahead of myself. So after just a few hours that Sunday evening, again, 5 days ago or so, less than 5 days ago, after just a few hours, 2 or 3 hours of watching videos and stuff, I took that King's test for the first time and I got a 62%. Now you need 70% to pass the test for the license. So at that point, because during this time I'd seen, especially with some of the YouTube videos out there, I'd seen courses that you could take anywhere from $100 all the way up to like $300. And I'm like, you know what? If I'm right out of the gate with just a few hours, if I'm um, getting 62% and I only need 70 to pass, I think I got this. I think I can do this on my own. And so what I did is I took that King's School or whatever test, and I used that as a guide. So I would take the test, I would go through the questions that I missed, and then I would go find content either on YouTube, again, Googling the internet, asking AI, whatever. I would go find the answer to those and kind of learn about them. So within a day or two, um, by the way, that 62% was the only failing score I ever had on a practice test, ever, this entire 5 days. And I've taken 15 to 20, I would say, is probably the amount of practice tests I took. The only failing score. And so um, the scores gradually started to creep up. You know, it was in the 70s. I was in the 70s and 80s, over the course of a few days. So once I got up into like the 80s with that King's School, um, I started taking some other free tests that was out there online, trying to mix it up. And I found something out real quick. I found out that all those other tests were super easy compared to that King's test. Um, it had some very difficult questions that sort of pushed me to go learn some more advanced things, or at least things in more detail. And so ultimately, I think that helped me out greatly. Um, so I would say after 3 days, probably definitely by Wednesday, I was 80s and 90s consistently, and I decided I'm going to schedule this test. And so I went in, found a testing center, all that stuff. I scheduled the test, and the FFA, the FFA, the FAA, the website sort of lays all that out. You can Google it, you can find all that info. And anyway, um, the testing center was very accommodating. I mean, they had appointments to do it literally every day of the week, multiple times each day. And so my initial thought was this was on a Wednesday and I would do it the following Wednesday, which as I'm filming this video would be what, 3 days, 4 days from now? Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 5 days from now. And I decided, you know what? I'm in like the 90s. Um, I'm gonna schedule it for Friday, like less than 5 days. Let's do this, right? Let's get it out of the way. And I did that, and got everything scheduled. It was $175 to take that class or the test. I'm sorry. And so in the meantime, I had Wednesday and then I had Thursday the next day. So once I scheduled the test, I started making like 97s and 100s on practice tests, right? And I started feeling like I might be overconfident. And I went and took or looked at some more videos. I was still filling in gaps, right? On questions I would miss on the test. And I was filling in gaps. And I thought, I'm going to watch some videos, much like this one right here. I'm going to watch some videos where somebody had just taken the Part 107 test fairly recently, and they're kind of giving their debrief and their experience on it. And every freaking one I watched, they said, "Oh, that test is no joke. Oh, it's so hard." And I also, backing up a little bit here, I was making the 97s and 100s right on those practice tests, and I would watch some more videos trying to just broaden my knowledge and learn more. And videos would pop up about the hardest questions on the test. And those questions, those videos were explaining these are the 5 or the 10 hardest questions on the test. I'm thinking, no, those are easy. Like I've got those down. I know those, right? And so that kind of led into the overconfidence thing a little bit too. Really worried me. So Friday rolls around and I get into the testing center, and all testing centers are going to work differently, so not a whole lot of reason to go through that. But they're going to provide you with the manual, and if you do practice tests and things like that, all your charts and graphs and your information and all that is in um, a supplemental guide, right? A book, and the testing center is gonna give you that, right? And so a lot of the videos I watched, it said that you can use that to answer a lot of the questions sometimes too. So I'm like, okay, cool. So I get to the testing center and they give me that. They give me pencils and paper, and you can't take literally anything in there. I was able to take a magnifying glass in. That was it. And I started taking the test. Now, as I took the test, I was keeping track of the questions that I weren't confident that I answered correctly. So by the time that I got through the test, there was 8 questions, and that I wasn't confident that I answered correctly. So I answered all 60 questions. Then I went back through them all a second time, and in the third wave or whatever you want to call it, I went back and looked at the 8. Okay. I added no more to the list on the second second run through, and I don't think I changed anything on the second run through that I remember either. And so I got back to those, and I ended up changing like 2 on those. So I know by now you're probably wondering, pretty obvious that I passed, but you're probably wondering, what? And I scored a 92%, which I was super surprised with, to be honest with you, because I had 8 that I wasn't sure about, and you don't really know what you missed and what you didn't. That's the bad thing. But it would appear I missed 5 questions. So I got lucky on one of the 8, maybe, and then maybe swapping the answer on those other 2. So now that um, we've kind of gotten through the test portion there, I know you're probably wondering too, what was the test like and what was on it? Now, keep in mind that these test questions rotate. That's why it's really important to find a really good practice test that does that, because the wording of the questions, like all that, rotates, right? So, one thing that you need to keep in mind, you'll hear a lot in studying about they try to trick you on the test. And I don't know that it's so much they try to trick you as you need to understand similar terms, right? There's, um, when you're dealing with elevation, there's sea level and there's from the ground, right? From sea level, from the ground, AGL and MSL. You want to, be sure you're aware of the differences. You want to pay attention to the question and the words used on the questions. Another big one is you got to register your drone and you get a certification or license, right, as a pilot. And so make sure you're answering the right questions that the question they're asking. If they're asking about a certification, don't give them an answer for a registration and vice versa. Just little things like that. Uh, Brush up on all the acronyms. Make sure that you understand what those are. Brush up on all of the numbers. Um, the classes of airports, the elevation, floors and ceilings, the time limits to um, file waivers, and the how long licenses and registrations are good for. Make sure you understand all of that stuff. Um, and you need to make sure that you obviously understand weather, I think, and the supplemental charts. And we'll get a little more in depth here on that. So, what I think about the test, I think about the hardest parts to me of the test was also really the hardest parts of the studying. And it wasn't the hard and fast data, right? It wasn't the classes of airports, like that's defined. That's easy. It wasn't really the weather, like clouds are clouds, and it's pretty much science and it's defined, right? Regulations and the time limits and things like that, pretty solid, pretty defined. Um, no, what hung me up was a lot of the questions on the attitude and the physical and mental capabilities of the pilot, right? The so physiological, the psychiatric, I don't know what you would call it, portions. So when you're studying, I would say, if you're like me anyway, focus on those because it was after the fact, and thankfully I knew enough overall to obviously get a 92%, but and pass. But um, make sure that you're paying attention to that stuff and you kind of understand. A lot of it is common sense, but the way that some of the answers on some of those types of questions are worded, you can really get confused because they sound really similar. Okay. That being said, I think the test was broken up into, I would say, like four different categories pretty well, um, pretty evenly. One thing in the studying is having to do, I think one section of that was the sectional charts, right? Which is maps, and they ask you questions on what type of airport, what class of airport it is, how tall are obstructions, there's things like that, right? So with the sectional charts, all of the um, uh, all of the lost my train of thought. All of the questions that I had with sectional charts, they were easy. They were super easy. I had no math to do as far as calculating load or calculating elevations. I had none of that. Now, you might be prepared for it, but I had none of that. The closest thing I had was it was talking about, there was a question talking about you're operating your drone in this area around the airport, and this aircraft is, I can't remember if it was landing or taking off, but how the heading was and how it was landing or taking off, and what did you need to do? And the answer to that question in my case was it wasn't in the way. It was on the north side of the airport, and I was on the south, or there was something like that, right? And so I didn't have to worry about it. But that was the most complex on the sectional chart. The weather was sort of the same way. Of course, I've always kind of nerded out on weather, so I kind of understand weather anyway. But with weather, on that King School test, it did a lot with weather prognostic charts. And there was zero, there was none on my test at all with those. However, there were the weather reports. They're called the METARs and the TAFs. and you need to know the abbreviations and how to read the abbreviations. It's super easy once you understand it. Um, like BC is broken clouds, or B is it BK? Is broken clouds, and uh, OC for overcast, and Z is Zulu, which is the time, and that sort of thing. Like rain is RA. It's not that difficult, and once you understand those, so the second portion, you had the sectional charts, not a big deal. Weather was the second one. And you had a few that you had to read those reports, and then the rest was just general weather and patterns, like how the wind worked. Well, if you know, wind is low pressure systems, high pressure systems, temperature, once you kind of understand temperature and humidity, especially, um, then it's not that difficult to understand how weather patterns move and what happens, right? Um, Three different types of clouds that you kind of need to know. Not a huge deal there. Um, and that's on the weather side. And then the third would be the what I call the regulatory, right? And that's the if you do this, what happens? Like, who do you report X to? How many days do you have to report an injury that's happened? How long is your license valid for, or your registration, or whatever it might be, right? The regulatory side. Uh, there was quite a bit of that. Again, that was hard and fast data, so pretty easy as far as I'm concerned on that. And then that fourth was again more about involved that mental and attitude and like physical things around flight, but it also dealt with load weight and like kind of like who's responsible for doing this or doing that. It's almost always the remote pilot in command, by the way. Um, but it's more procedural, how to fly, that sort of thing, and prerequisites to flight, not regulatory prerequisites, but um, prerequisites nonetheless. So I need to back up because down below in the pinned comment, I just thought about this. I will link another test that I used, which was Peltier Drone School, I think, or something like that, or drone course, or drone pilot course. And it was free. And it was a test unlike the King School. You had to go all the way through the King School test, and then it would not. You had to go all the way through before you could finish it. Right? It wouldn't give you any of the answers till then. The Peltier Drone School one, and again, link in a comment below. It it would have, as soon as you clicked, it would basically tell you if you got it right or wrong, which was kind of handy. You can move through it a little quicker. But again, it was not as in depth. And ultimately, a 92%, I've got that King School test to thank. I'm telling you, because it was difficult. It forced me to learn more than I probably needed to learn otherwise, you know. Which kind of brings me back around to the drone before we get out of here. This is what's frustrating about all this. So this drone and the way I'm going to use it, right, for my content. I'd be looking for some of that here on the channel, by the way. Um, but the way that I'm going to use this through my phone, controlling it, obviously with push button, kind of the automated. It's 20 foot from me, maybe. Controlling it with my phone, it doesn't have a range of more than probably 100 foot, 150 at absolute max. Um, it can't really get super high in the air. It's small, so it doesn't buck wind very well when it gets up there for sure. And um, what else with it? Um, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to be using it any higher than probably 20 foot. It's going to be well within 100 foot of me, so forth and so on. And you got to go through all this crap for this right here. It's horrible. It's terrible. Um, and then on top of that, it's so small, and I got to add that again, like we talked about at the first video, that remote ID module to it to make it compliant. Because as a certified, a licensed drone pilot now, like I can't fly this without that. Um, Now, how's that going to affect the flight and the battery time? It's probably going to affect the battery time because I'm adding weight to the thing. My thought is I'll pull all of my extras off because these extras are more for flying for fun. I'll pull all the extras off, and the weight difference hopefully won't be that much once that's considered. Um, but one cool thing, I guess, about it is when you get into flying over crowds. Like flying over crowds, if you don't have your license, is a no-no. And then if you are flying on over crowds, there are multiple classes of drone aircraft. There's there are categories, category 1 through 4, and so one being the least restrictive. And once I put the remote ID module on this, and that should be here tomorrow actually, or the next day, once I get it on here and everything registered up, um, yeah, I can fly this over crowds, which is kind of cool because it's light enough weight. It has the remote ID and it has propeller guards, which means you can't get fingers. If this falls out of the sky, the propellers aren't going to hurt anybody, and it's pretty lightweight, so it's not going to hurt anybody. So, I would like to say if you've gotten this far in watching and you have questions, put them down below. Go ahead and do that. But again, I'm 5 days into this, guys, gals. Um, I don't know that I can answer the vast majority of them. This was more about just kind of giving you my experience and yeah, letting it go. So long video, I know, but there were quite a few of you out there when I'd posted that I'd taken my test and passed it that expressed some interest. So hopefully this will help some of you out there. Bye.